It's time again for the Insiders with Chuck Chvala and Scott Jensen, sponsored by the Wisconsin Counties Association and the Tommy G. Thompson Center on Public Leadership.
Hi, I'm Chuck Chvala, former Senate Majority Leader.
And I'm Scott Jensen, former Assembly Speaker.
And we're the Insiders. So, Scott, we've got the spring legislative session coming up before the election. What do you think is going to be on the agenda for Republicans, and how much of it is going to get passed? How much of it is really just kind of setting the tone for the fall election? What's going to happen this spring? The Republicans are in control, so what are they going to do?
Well, you're right that the spring session is sort of the last chance for people to make an impression on the voters before they face the judgment of the voters in their districts. And I think the Republicans are going to dedicate this spring session to affordability issues. So first of all, they're going to do what they can to constrain property taxes. They're going to highlight the fact that the governor drove property taxes up with his 400-year veto. They're going to try to eliminate that and eliminate the ability of governors in the future to single-handedly use a veto to raise spending and to raise taxes. So I think you'll see that they're going to try to go back and do something I can't believe the governors and the Democrats didn't sign up for in the last budget, which was the Republicans wanted to agree with the federal government to eliminate taxes on overtime and tips. And there's two things going there. I think most people support those policies. Most people think that that's something sort of in addition to your salary, and people are doing those sort of jobs because they need the money, and the government shouldn't be reaching in and taking that money. Unfortunately, because we didn't agree with the federal government to change the tax laws on that during the last budget, people in Wisconsin this spring will be filling out their income taxes. They'll do the federal tax, and then on the state tax, they will have to add back the money that the federal government said is no longer going to be taxed on your retirement, on your overtime income and your tips. That's a mess for people, and it just sort of brings to mind the fact that in the last budget, the governor and the Democrats fought against that. I think they're also going to try to address utility costs. This one could be bipartisan. I hope it is. In that we're going to try to make sure that with all these new data centers that are getting built, that the data centers are paying their full and fair share of the costs that are going to be created for the amount of energy they're using, the impact on the infrastructure of the energy system. And then I hope that there's some things we can do to address healthcare costs. Much of that is driven at the federal level, but there are some things we can do at the state level, and I think everyone agrees that healthcare costs are just rising faster than families' ability to pay.
I think that Scott is right. I think that you'll probably see bipartisan support for making sure that data centers don't leave Wisconsin utility ratepayers holding the bag. I think that that's something that should be able to be done on a bipartisan basis. And there was almost this rush to get data centers in before policymakers ever figured out what was really going to happen to people. And I think Republicans and Democrats do agree on that and should be able to get together. With regard to healthcare, it's very difficult to do these things at the state level, but there are some issues. You'll notice that there's actually the business community in Wisconsin is generally always united. It's always, okay, you've got your special thing and I've got my special thing. But you notice the hospitals are now coming out and they're on a different page than WMC. I think finally there's a rift there, and maybe we're going to get a chance to do something on healthcare costs, but it's really more of a national issue. That's the way it works. Wisconsin, by the way, surprisingly, has very high healthcare costs
among the highest in the nation. Yeah,
it's really disturbing, and it's something that policymakers should take on, but really haven't done it. I doubt they'll take on anything serious this spring. Then the final thing, though, in terms of affordability, of course, that's the word of the moment. But the Republicans, where they're going to lose the election this year is because they won't do anything. You'll notice, even with everything Scott said, and he said a lot, and he's the best best person to articulate the Republican agenda. He didn't say a word about providing more state funding to be able to provide property tax relief, because they always want to give a tax cut to the rich, and the Republicans don't see that as property tax relief. Oh, and by the way, most of the things that businesses have, like all their equipment and manufacturing machinery and all this big break for manufacturers and for agriculture, big agriculture, They're not going to give any property tax relief because they don't want to. What they will do to, quote, hold down your property tax is make sure that there can't be increased spending on public education. And that's not where we should be. And by the way, they've put voucher schools on the property tax as well. So the problem is here that they will be caught because they aren't really addressing the affordability issue. Yes, over time but that's a red herring. Most people don't have that. Everybody listening to this knows what's the one thing we all pay? It's the property tax. And if you're paying a property tax, you need to have that reduced. And that's going to be the battle this fall. Republicans have had control for 20 years. They can't blame it on Tony Evers because it's been the budgets that he hasn't vetoed a single budget. He's passed every one of them. And Robin Vos is in charge. Republicans are in charge. And that's why in the fall election, after the spring legislative agenda, Republicans will pay the price. And that's the most important takeaway from what will be largely a political spring agenda for both parties.
Well, I think you're going to hear a lot about the 400-year veto that Governor Evers did that drove up property taxes. And you're going to see Republicans hammer that all the way home during the next elections. Tips and overtime, that's not a tax cut for the rich. Those folks are they're working every day to make the ends meet, and they count on that. In Wisconsin, overtime is it's like part of your expected income, right? People the house they bought, they were counting that I was going to be working overtime either at the paper plant or as a cop or as a firefighter, as a nurse. They're counting on that as income to pay the bills. And if the federal government's stopping taxing that, we should stop taxing that.
Scott, I agree with you 100%, but you know as well as I do, that's the tail on the dog. That doesn't hit the broad electorate out there. This is something that's minor so that Republicans have a talking point to say, look at this shiny object over here. Don't pay attention to your property tax bill. Not going to work this time, guys. We'll see you next time.
You've been listening to The Insider with Chuck Chvala and Scott Jensen, sponsored by the Wisconsin Counties Association and the Tommy G. Thompson Center on Public Leadership.